Story 1. There are a few, but having a nude painting of yourself in the foyer of the guest house was one. Couldn't believe it. Laughing out loud. Story 2. I did a week's worth of work on the ranch of the man who invented the fleshlight. He was wealthy. He had a giant house with a Spanish-style fountain out front, a spa, gym, and office with a huge Roman-style pool and statuary, an attached walled garden with a stone Buddha statue and an Indian tiger tower, a massive barn, and his own disco club. It was quite the compound. His dark secret was that he was somewhat boring and down to earth for what he was famous for. Every day he would drive an off-road utility vehicle around and look at the birds. His wife was quite nice too, though maybe a little out of touch. She complained about how hard it was to buy legitimate antiques, such as the statues, because countries were cracking down on exporting cultural relics. They treated me well. They would come around to check if I had enough water and chat with me for a bit each day. Honestly, they were pretty nice people. Story 3. I did a personal information technology service for an incredibly wealthy man in Tucson. His house overlooked the city from the foothills, with 8-foot single-pane windows and more. He owned a ranch of at least 40,000 acres in Texas, and most of his money came from oil. His biggest secret was that he knew most people liked him only for his wealth, including his current wife, 2 children, and 2 stepchildren. They would cut ties in a heartbeat if his wealth disappeared. Story 4. Worked for 3 to 4 billionaires. I was in construction management and completed multi-year remodels of some homes as well as new builds. I have been on their jets and yachts, visited 3 of their 9 homes, driven their cars, and helped move Picassos across a 30,000 square foot house. My biggest takeaways are, 1. Many of them have no real understanding of how the real world works. And 2. It is often a lonely, fearful, and sad life. They stress over who is trying to take advantage of them. My wealthiest client ever drove a Prius because she was afraid of being targeted. They paid for around-the-clock security at the house because they fear those who resent the wealthy and live in paranoia. Their children have nothing to aspire to, no dreams, and any accomplishments are mere expectations. I left because the stress was unbearable when pulling a solution out of nowhere became what I was known for, and the expectation was that I would always be able to do that. They throw money at your bosses, your boss agrees to the impossible, and then you have to get it done. Story 5. I once had to entertain an oligarch for an afternoon, but had no idea he was a legitimate oligarch with wealth capable of destroying the world. The only lesson I learned was that you never know who someone really is. He dressed, acted, and enjoyed himself in all the ways a normal person on a budget would. I didn't get the impression that was an act for me, but he definitely appreciated that I didn't know or care who he was. I took him to a dive bar and then for tacos afterward. My boss said the oligarch reported a great time and made sure I received the recognition. Story 6. I worked at a place that sold very expensive watches and jewelry, frequented by the rich and famous. I would sometimes get in trouble because I did not recognize them, such as basketball players' wives. These were a specific type of wealthy person who wanted others to know exactly how rich they were. I learned that there are brands catering specifically to these people, mostly recognized only within their own circles. Many ultra-wealthy people do not dress up when they go out. They can appear plain or even sloppy. It was important never to assume someone's status. They are petty and will throw you under the bus in an instant if it will even slightly benefit them. While I worked there, I was screamed at and had things thrown at me. I saw grown men throw huge tantrums. They do this because they know they will gain something from it. Your work had to be flawless because they would purposely try to find faults to exploit. I hated that their behavior was always rewarded. I preferred it when their assistants were the ones we helped. Many of them seemed incredibly isolated and lonely. Some would talk politics to us because they had no one else to listen. To be honest, we were not allowed to express any of our own thoughts, so it was a pretty one-sided conversation. Story 7. They are unusually cheap, or most I have worked for are. I am in wine sales and cellar management. I had a client who owned over $10 million in First Growth Bordeaux and Grand Cru Burgundy. He served $20 Pinot and sparkling wine at his Christmas party for his best friends and celebrities. He died with a $10 million cellar. Story 8. A surprising number of them are hoarders. They have mansion-level filth hidden behind marble gates. Being rich does not mean being clean. Story 9. He was separated and married a second wife. He never legally divorced, and the second wife is a mistress whom he presents as his wife. The actual wife does not care as long as they remain wealthy, but will not allow his second set of children to inherit their shared assets. Therefore, he had to purchase income properties for his second wife's financial security. She will be fine. He bought her income properties worth $100 million. Story 10. Changed out some home security equipment for a very wealthy older couple with a net worth exceeding $10 billion. The wife was incredibly kind, and if encountered in public, she would appear completely normal. It was the little things in their home that amazed me, handcrafted everything. They even sent me and my team home with a bunch of items from their garden. Story 11. I used to be close friends with a kid who was best friends with a slightly younger kid whose mother's family was probably worth $5 billion. We would go over to his house and do whatever activity you could imagine. Every single night, there were sternos with dinner from one of the local high-end restaurants, unless a chef came in to make something. Every couple of months, we would take the family jet to his apartment in a large city. Limo to hangar, board the plane, laid out food on the flight, limo directly off the plane to the apartment. One time, his marijuana dealer in the city was out of town, so he asked me to bring an ounce for him, back when it was $400 per ounce for high quality. I had made the flight before, so I knew security was no issue, but as a 20-year-old kid, that was a huge expense. I felt awful bringing it up after everything we didn't pay for, and I did smoke, but not at his rate. We always sat courtside at basketball games, went to a club afterward and spent more than $25,000, ate at the best places and so on. So I just accepted it. On the limo ride back to the plane after that weekend, he was messing with his bag and pulled out $1,000 in an envelope, saying, "My bad, man. I totally forgot to get you this." He was a young man, kind and soft-spoken. I haven't seen him in probably 15 years. Story 12. My dad cleans houses, ranging from the smallest studio apartment to large homes with their own security guards and driveways in Southern California. The biggest houses had the cheapest and most judgmental people. I once went to a house where the master closet was bigger than our entire house, which is 1,800 square feet. The owner was the nastiest person I have ever met. Middle-class people were the best. They always tipped and gave free food to my parents. Story 13. I worked in the technology investor and startup space. I ended up at the World Economic Forum in Davos one year. I remember eating a $32 hamburger while listening to a man brag about influencing elections in developing nations to support his commercial interests. He spoke so casually, as if sharing old college stories. He shared mistakes he had made in his political schemes that caused civil wars and lamented the tens of thousands of lives his errors had indirectly taken. Drunk at a bar on a mountain, he talked through literal crimes with the tone of someone who had messed up at their day job. I remember that he believed it was his duty to influence, that whatever underlying meritocracy granted him enough power to buy elections also required him to guide the poor, silly populations beneath him. He left me with the check for his beer. Story 14. I do not know if it is a deep secret, but they did seem to hide the reality behind the image. They appeared to be an upright family man who had created an empire from nothing. Their child committed suicide on Father's Day. It was a clear statement about why they chose that day, according to people who were close enough to understand. However, the death was largely concealed, described as an accident, and portrayed as something other than what it really was. It was not an accident. It was a tortured soul's final outcry against their horrible, abusive father, who was a terrible person as an employer. I can only imagine the horror he must have been as a parent. They chose that day to end their life. Even though I was a child when it happened, I remember realizing how significant the day they chose was, given the grim circumstances. Story 15. This was 50 years ago. I worked for dozens of the wealthiest clients, those with $100 million and up. They were very consistently joyless, entitled, arrogant, and cheap, often coupled with substance abuse issues, with notable exceptions. One of the richest, a multiple billionaire, would occasionally come out and work with me. I was doing landscaping, maintenance, or whatever was needed. He asked me to help plant some strawberries, worked alongside me the entire time, and described high finance, how to shift risk to the other party while retaining control and the lion's share of the profit. He was easygoing and a super nice guy. Story 16. I was recently upgraded by a very kind hotel staff member and stayed on the hotel's exclusive floor. The rooms were really nice, but it was all the extra amenities that stood out. An exclusive lounge with free canapes, a selection of custom scents for the room, and a dedicated concierge who seemed confused that I did not require any assistance. There was also access to a spa. Later, while sitting in the lounge, a woman approached the concierge, gave him a piece of paper with her measurements, and asked him to have workout clothes and shoes sent to her room so she could use the gym. It was as if there were a magical chamber downstairs with everyone's exact sizes of shoes and clothes. She appeared perplexed when he explained that such a service did not exist and suggested a Lululemon store a few blocks away. She then said, "Excellent. Send someone over to pick some items up. I prefer earth tones. Just charge it to my room." She did not wait for a reply before walking away. It is astonishing. Some people are so used to having everything they need instantly that they are utterly surprised when the answer is no. Story 17. I worked in the wedding business for 8 years. After a while, I was able to identify ultra-wealthy clients during initial phone calls and emails and always turn them down. Newly rich people have one objective: impress others. That's it. Nothing was ever good enough. Most wedding clients had timelines broken into 30-minute blocks. I had one wealthy mother-in-law who had her timeline in 5-minute blocks. Yes, 5-minute blocks. After the wedding, she emailed me 6 pages of criticism, absolutely heartbroken that her daughter's golden hour sunset photos were delayed by 10 minutes because our champagne service was not efficient enough. I had one bride email me 6 months after her wedding to complain that we provided her a new staff member for her reception. This person was extra labor. She was provided an extra server for free, as I always paid extensively for new hires to have on-the-job training before they were given real shifts. One rich bride was enraged that my employees put 2, not 1, orange slices in her cocktail. By contrast, blue-collar people were almost always the nicest, laid-back, sincere, grateful, and high-tipping clients with actual friends and family who had a wedding for all the right reasons. Old money people and self-made successful people, that is, those who worked construction and then launched their own businesses, were night and day different from new money, mostly information technology professionals, obsessed with impressing the Joneses. Story 18. The more money they have, the more problems they create to avoid paying you. Sign a contract, get a guarantee with clawbacks, and wait. Wealthy people are rich because they prefer not to spend money, and they know they can outlitigate the smaller party to avoid payment. Cover your actions. Money is worthless if you don't get it up front. The wealthier they are, the more you should protect yourself up front. Working with a billionaire client requires 70% payment upfront and 30% on the back end. Also, know who they trust to sign off so if they are unavailable, you can deal with that person. This is the best advice I can give. Story 19. I have flown private jets for various wealthy individuals. People you would likely never know, as they do not exist in the public sphere in the way someone like Jeff Bezos does. They do not always have some deep, dark secret unique to wealth. They are human, and the emotions and tendencies they exhibit are the same across the entire human spectrum. I have come away seeing that wealth just amplifies who you are. If you are mean, you become more mean. If you are kind, you become more kind. They still have problems, some of which are tied to their wealth, including family drama, access to wealth, and raising children to be humble or entitled. They are more insulated from legal or political consequences. Story 20. I worked for a high-end furniture store and delivered furniture for years when I was young. Most customers try to get as much as they can while paying as little as possible. Many times we would show up with furniture, and they would expect us to move the entire house around like we were a moving company. If we refused, they would call the manager and say we had to do it, or they would refuse the furniture, threaten to leave a bad review, or just leave. Eventually, the manager made it clear to all customers that we are a delivery service, not a moving service. Once that was settled, some customers tried to bribe us with tips. A few times when we were broke, we agreed, but they would not give the tip, either pretending they forgot or making up excuses not to tip. For example, they might say, "When you carried that 300-pound armoire down to the basement, the third step started creaking. We need to use the tip money to pay the carpenter who will fix it." When we presented the bill, they acted like we were asking for something outrageous and complained about the cost as if they hadn't known the price when they ordered. I dislike entitled customers. I know some are okay, but based on my experience, about 90% are cheap and abusive. Story 21. Long-time lurker, first-time poster. I have not worked for any, but my stepfather is one. I remember one instance when he was planning a flight and his plane needed maintenance before flying. Instead of waiting the couple of weeks for the plane to be fixed, he just bought another plane. He believes that money can solve everything, which, unsurprisingly, it does not. He thinks he can just pay people to either stay quiet or ignore issues, including family matters. He has constant arguments with my mom, often ignoring the problem and offering her large gifts, thinking that will solve the issue. He usually does not. His kids are completely messed up. They spent their entire lives never being told no. Now they are becoming adults and have been metaphorically slapped in the face with the fact that most people actually have to work for a living. They don't understand the concept. The idea of having assets in different countries and hiding transactions under the guise of charity is completely true. I don't think he does it out of malice, but because he believes his only worth is his money. In reality, he is a kind person, but he sees all relationships as transactions. I often feel sad for him when I hear from family members how he sweeps real problems under the rug and covers them with money, because he thinks that is the only solution. It is also sad to see how much of life you miss when you feel like you cannot go anywhere without needing protection. We come from a developing country where the rich are specifically known as such and targeted often. As a result, there is always a need to hide either yourself or your money. For example, my stepfather's mother has not left the gated property where she lives for about 5 years because she is afraid that if she goes out in public, she will be kidnapped for ransom or similar situations. She lives about a 45-minute drive from one of the most beautiful beaches in the world and has never seen it. She is very lonely. She has a hired staff member specifically to keep her company. Someone paid to be with her because she is lonely and does not know how to make friends who are not interested in money. Money does solve many problems, but it can also create them. Story 22. I didn't work for the ultra-wealthy, but my mother, who was extremely beautiful but not wealthy, grew up as a socialite, the kind who was a debutante and was supposed to marry an ultra-wealthy man. Instead, she married my dad, who was a struggling artist. One of her best friends came to visit our humble home when I was 12 years old in 1992. She was an heiress to a huge fortune, and she had just come from Paris where she had seen the Calvin Klein runway show. She liked the clothes so much that she bought the entire collection. However, since they were the pieces worn by the models instead of off the rack, they didn't fit the way they should, and sometimes her shirt just fell off. Luckily for her, she had just gotten a new breast augmentation and was happy to show it off. She was on a lot of prescription pills, drank alcohol from dawn to dusk, and chain smoked. We didn't have a guest room, so she shared my bed. She would periodically wake up, take pills, and smoke, burning holes in my comforter. One night, she suddenly screamed in her sleep, "You better get that woman out of my house or I am calling the police." 12-year-old me thought she was fascinating and hilarious. The night she woke me up screaming and cursing, I got out of bed and went into the living room to find my father watching the Los Angeles riots on television because he said, "It's a lot more peaceful than what's going on here." Story 23. So I do not work with ultra-wealthy people, but I have lived next to one for 10 years and just realized it maybe a year ago. The nicest neighbors ever. A standard suburban house, decent cars but not flashy. It was only when I noticed they were gone for 2 to 3 months that I asked the wife, and she said she was traveling with her husband to India, Japan, Italy, Iceland, among other places. It turns out he is the chief executive officer of a massive global company, and they must be worth close to $500 million or more. Story 24. In my past work, I met and spent time with celebrities, mostly singers. The old school people were the best. People like Ricky Skaggs and Merle Haggard were just people who sang for a living and were happy that people enjoyed their work. Many new talents, such as Terry Clark and Taylor Swift, are supreme snobs. Dolly Parton will sit and talk like you're in the office waiting for your appointment. Kelly Clarkson you can have. Story 25. I attended a private boarding school with many ultra-wealthy students. There was abuse of every kind. Beatings, starvation, being locked out, torture, and sexual assault. People do not call because there is no point. The authorities will not intervene, let alone take action. The richer the family, the more troubled their children are if something is wrong. Story 26. I worked for a large company owned by a single family. They could not all fly in their private jet at once, just in case the plane went down. They also had a brief introduction to important meetings about what would happen if the family head died during or after the meeting and the succession plan. Story 27. They are cheap and stingy but strangely generous to the chosen few they let in. They do not think they are ultra-wealthy because they constantly compare themselves to anyone who has more, newer, or better things than they do. Their wealth is also subjective, based on their own perceived rise and fall. They are very insecure about anything they have lost. They will feel their empire has fallen as they age. Story 28. I worked as an architectural designer for extremely wealthy clients. It was the least fulfilling position I ever had. Most of the buildings were fifth vacation homes that only their lawyers would use. I was told these homes provided a tax break, though I never understood how. I had total design freedom in most cases, which is every designer's dream. I created a Japanese-Hawaiian 1950s surf theme in one kitchen, featuring a vintage surfboard as the bar top. After a while, I started calling these homes palaces of dust, because no one ever used them. Many were on private ranches managed by the firm, and the maintenance tasks were depressing to see because the properties were clearly unused. And yet, they were beautiful. The very few clients who got personally involved were the reason I left high-end design. They would ignore boundaries, such as calling me in the middle of the night to say they wanted the kitchen window returned to its original position before construction. The worst incidents ended in 2 deaths. It was winter in a region where weather is a serious concern. This project was nearing completion, and the owner flew in unannounced on the day the home theater was being installed. The installers were coming from a location that would be a 45-minute drive in the summer, along a dangerous road known locally as Suicide Road because of ice hazards. The theater company tried to cancel due to the weather. I was told to call and inform them the owner was in town and they had to proceed. I refused. A 20-year-old drafting assistant was given the task. She called and they agreed to send their crew. About 20 minutes later, I was told to call again. This time I did, hoping they had reconsidered. Instead, I was given their cell phone numbers. I refused to call the installers directly because I knew they would be driving through a canyon with black ice next to a river without guardrails. The assistant called and informed them the owner was waiting. Then another architectural designer called, followed by the assistant again. I asked them not to call, but the impatient owner overrode all concerns. Then the calls stopped. They had hit a patch of black ice, lost control, and crashed into a ditch and a light pole. Speed was a factor. Both installers had families with young children. Neither the architectural firm nor the home theater company ever mentioned these calls to anyone. As for the owner, he was annoyed at the delay. Story 29. I worked as a personal assistant for a billionaire. He was delusional. His wife was something else. She would have breakdowns, screaming and crying in her glass office, so the whole floor could see and hear her. Could be over something as simple as her lunch being late or wrong. Luckily, I was not her personal assistant. She went through a few of them quickly. One time, she was supposed to speak at a company event, and it was raining. I was told we pushed her slot to avoid the rain, so I called her hairdresser, who was doing her hair at a rented mansion. She still showed up at the original time and had an absolute meltdown about the rain, the mud, and her slot being pushed. My boss was upset with me and didn't want to hear anything about my call ahead. I just accepted it and said sorry. He told me, "Sorry is for losers." Okay. There is a show and documentary about them that gives a glimpse into who they are. Watching it gave me post-traumatic stress disorder. Story 30. Worked with the finances of ultra-wealthy individuals. The darkest secret I encountered was that the children of parents who accumulated their wealth often had troubled personalities. They seemed to lack passion, struggled with drug addictions, and appeared emotionally empty. Story 31. Not me, but my parents. They went to school with a girl from a poor farm family who became rich after high school. The girl and her roommate were in college and created the first storyline of a very popular video game. She went to school for computer science and earned a degree along with the royalties from selling that storyline. She worked for the company that purchased the storyline for a while and then decided to retire early. My parents stayed in touch with her occasionally but had not seen her in many years until recently, when her mother died from cancer. The last time she spoke to my mom, she expressed feeling very lonely after several failed relationships for various reasons. She fell into a deep depression and used some of her money to isolate herself from other people. When my parents reconnected with her during her mother's funeral, they said she looked very aged and worn out, as if she had not slept in years. It turned out she was on various depression and anxiety medications that were not working well, and she had stayed awake for over 48 hours before the funeral. Her father said she was losing weight quickly and told my parents the money had changed her. It was clear she lives life one day at a time, hoping the day ends quickly so she can go to bed. It broke my parents' hearts to know that despite her success, she struggles with her insecurities and mental health issues. Story 32. I worked for a man doing a remodel on one of his bedrooms. One day, I was driving to his place and my truck broke down. I called to tell him I would be late due to the breakdown. He sent me to the Ford dealership and put a Ford F-350 on his American Express card for about $80,000 and called it a bonus. Story 33. One of my best friends in my teens was the son of the one-time richest man in the region. They were completely normal aside from their house's interior. There were at least a dozen other houses in their neighborhood better than theirs. It is quaint by today's country club standards. But absolutely everything was the best available. Commercial, huge Sub-Zero refrigerators disguised as cabinetry. High-flush toilets that were completely silent. A wired smart house as much as that existed in 1990, which is more than you think. Subtle touches, understated wealth. Lots of accessory-type bland original art, like Audubon prints or landscapes. Mom drove a station wagon, Dad a Buick. They were generous and kind. They raised their kids to be accountable and treat people right. Dad was self-made, Mom second-generation wealth. The actual billionaire I worked for was super cool. Self-made. I had monthly meetings with him and about 16 others. To see his ability to connect with hourly workers to senior executives was impressive. Story 34. They are painfully detached from regular struggles and genuinely believe that their success is tied to meritocracy, even when born into extreme wealth. When success is earned, they refuse to acknowledge that luck played a factor. They fundamentally cannot understand the word no, and you have to explain things to them so they think they are right. For example, when they try to break specific rules, you often have to say, "I will make sure to share your suggestions so hopefully we can change that rule in the future." Also, no one loves free things more than rich people. Story 35. Paul Allen and his family were the worst. The news articles about the sexual harassment are true. Their in-house lawyer left all the correspondence and documents out in an unlocked office while the cleaning crew and the security staff chaperoning them were there. I guess they figured no one late at night there read English. Story 36. I have a neighbor. We are both 78 years old. When he was about 19 or 20, he worked for Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis as a handyman around her horse ranch in New York. He once assembled a motorcycle for her son, John, that she had shipped from Italy. He said she was the nicest person you could imagine. She even cooked him breakfast a couple of times when he was all sweaty after doing early morning chores. Story 37. They can actually be quite cheap when nobody is looking. Penny pinching is pretty common. They will use the lowest bidders on services like cleaning and lawn care, then withhold payment over minor disputes. They are also poor tippers when nobody is around. I have been out to dinner with a wealthy friend. The table order was quite expensive, but she only tipped $5. She slid it quickly under a napkin so nobody could see how little she left. If she had been with her other wealthy friends, the tip would have been much larger. That same friend also bought me a drink once while we were out, a soda, not an alcoholic beverage. It was $1.50, no big deal for someone with a very large bank account. When we got back to her place, she asked me to repay her because she was nearing her weekly budget for snacks and other items. I did, gave her two $1 bills, and she kept the change. Story 38. I have done work for quite a few wealthy people. Couple were lovely. A few were just regular. Most were unpleasant. And one and his wife were truly evil. Story 39. I have provided construction services, and the non-disclosure agreement was always in place. Almost all of the clients were lonely, and their wives were unhappy. The children had nannies and were well cared for, and the men all had personal assistants. The latest thing I have noticed is that the wealthy love pickleball, the sport. I have eaten food and drunk alcohol with these people, and it is fascinating. The women love online shopping. There were deliveries every day. Helicopters are a big deal too, especially the Airbus helicopters H-135. If any women are reading this post, I have never seen so many women's high-end shoes in my life, like hundreds of pairs in dedicated closets. Story 40. Nepotism is prevalent. Routing various favors, money laundering, and bribes through multiple nonprofit organizations and family foundations, ensuring they are photographed at their charitable events so everyone sees their philanthropy. Story 41. I had a very wealthy boss who really had no boundaries about 20 years ago. I worked at an art gallery and was paid very little. One night after a big party, I ended up at his house with an agent from out of town. I was just public relations babysitting. I discovered all he had in his house to eat was champagne, a block of Parmesan cheese, and cocaine. I left as soon as possible. He had me break up with women he invited up to his cabin for the weekend. One was a Roquette who forgot her cell phone, and I had to priority FedEx it back to her. I also had his Chase Manhattan Bank personal identification numbers and dealt with his expenses. He was very lucky I am an honest person because I cannot stress enough, I was only 27. Story 42. The author Robert Carl once said, "Power does not corrupt, it reveals." Power and money only make people more of what they already are. They enable individuals to indulge every fantasy or perversion they can think of, or the power becomes irrelevant. I have known a few people who work hard because they love to work. Are they frugal? Of course. Do they like a deal? Yes, just like everyone else. Wealthy people do not buy lottery tickets, not because they do not want the money, but because the odds are so bad. Story 43. I knew people who would buy multi-million-dollar homes in a resort area and live there for the peak season for 1 or maybe 2 years, then sell them just as quickly for a huge profit. They considered that their jobs because they would make hundreds of thousands just by holding a property for a year or two. Story 44. It is not a secret but a fact. They have lifetime concierge services taking care of all their life and mental load. They also use fake names all the time, everywhere. Story 45. I design home bathrooms and kitchens. I dislike going to mansions of the very wealthy. They are often the cheapest and most frustrating people. They do not respect your time. Designing a bathroom or kitchen takes hours. The middle class get excited and want to proceed with the purchase, arranging financing if needed. The wealthy clients can be the worst. I just left an $8 million lake house. I drove 2 hours to get there. The client told me not to waste his time and asked for a rough estimate of the cheapest bathroom. I told him $15,000 and he said it was out of his budget. Story 46. I was an electrician and worked on the home of a very famous professional wrestler. We were adding a bathroom to the guest house on his property. The bathroom in the guest house was 1,200 square feet. Just to give you an idea of how extremely wealthy this person is. The main house was basically a castle, easily 30,000 square feet. They had 6 Great Danes that would defecate all over the place, and they would just let the piles of dog waste sit on the marble floors of their gaudy mansion until the cleaners came every day to clean it up. They are not the only wealthy people I have known who behaved like this. They ignore their own filth until the people they pay to clean up after them come and take care of it. Story 47. I had a friend who was an heiress to a family name you would all know. She was a granddaughter, not a daughter, so her wealth was not as great, but she was beyond comfortable. We went out for drinks one night, and I didn't have much money on me, so she paid for a couple of rounds. The next day, I went over to repay her the $20 she had spent on me. She actually got emotional and said, "Nobody has ever paid me back before. They all figure she can afford it." This was in the 1980s, and I was making very little money as a secretary. But I actually felt sorry for her. Story 48. He only became a billionaire because of his father's connections. If he were just an ordinary person, he would probably still be the front desk manager of a hotel. Story 49. Not a secret, but working in high-end luxury, pieces starting at $10,000. You realize that the ultra-wealthy are sometimes incredibly tight with money. They expect things for free and ask for discounts because they consider themselves special and superior. Story 50. I worked as an assistant to billionaires, one family in the Middle East and a single man in London. They used private jets to move furniture and art. Generally, both preferred first-class commercial flights for long haul. The nannies even traveled first class. You are in a special club if you are among the top 100 customers of Emirates Airline, and the perks are significant. There was a large personal staff headcount. Each property had 4 to 8 live-in staff members. Adding drivers and assistants, personal staff easily reached 30 or more. It was common for a husband and wife team to co-manage a property. We maintained a book of credit cards for purchases in different currencies. You could never say no to these people. This was consistent with the ultra-wealthy. The man in London had 2 women each with whom he had a child. Both women had beautiful large townhouses with full staff, everything set up for them. One woman's spending account hovered around 300,000 British pounds. It was our job to keep it at that level. She was so lazy she would send her child's iPad to the office for me to download games on it. They still expected discounts frequently. Other times money was no issue, so we sometimes sent housekeepers on commercial flights to move things quickly. Moving expensive art is very challenging. You have to insure it, remove it from the wall, and transport it carefully. Story 51. Nothing dark. I worked a few landscape construction and carpentry jobs for a man who made a lot of money with an invention or modification to one. He then married a woman from a family that already had some money, but nowhere near as much. He was a regular man. If we suggested something that would achieve the same result but cost less, he was grateful. He tipped well. He brought us cold drinks and asked about our families. His wife, on the other hand, spent money as if there was no tomorrow. We completely redid the entire back garden area, more than an acre, in April because she was hosting a summer party. Tens of thousands of dollars were spent on landscaping and landscape construction. In August, she had us tear it all out to do something totally different because she was hosting a fall party, and they cannot just come back to the same old garden. She never tipped. After he agreed to some cost-saving measure, she would come behind us and demand we do it a more expensive way. If we said her husband told us not to, she would say, "You leave him to me." He treated everyone he interacted with as an equal. She treated everyone like help, if she acknowledged anyone at all. One interesting thing was that her father lived with them. He was an elderly man from Sicily who spoke no English and had a small garden that he tended every day. We communicated through a few words of Italian, many smiles and hand gestures. From what I gathered, he loved his garden, liked his son-in-law, and was embarrassed by his daughter. Story 52. I worked for a landscaping company that had some wealthy clients. One day, one of our customers casually talked about how we should line up all poor people and shoot them in the back of the head execution style. I thought, who do you think takes care of your lawn? I was not surprised by what he said. It just confirmed my suspicions. Story 53. Their days are often filled with busy work and nonsense and can be quite boring. They would send me to find their little dog. It usually took me a couple of hours because the mansion was so large. This was nearly a daily activity. Story 54. When you are rich, you do not have to impress anyone. Years ago, the Grateful Dead toured through my small city with 2 concerts. The business improvement area provided the businesses with a monthly event calendar. So we expected an increase because concerts had done that for my parents' restaurant, which was quite nice. No jacket was required, but nothing torn or ripped. Please. We attracted people from across the border and nearby cities, so we were prepared. Those 2 concert days, we had the scruffiest, patchouli oil-smelling, old sandal-smacking, tie-dyed t-shirt-wearing crowd I had ever seen come in for early dinner, filling the dining room. We skipped the dress code. They were by far the nicest and most polite crowd we had for a concert date. We never processed that many gold and platinum American Express cards on a midweek day before, and they tipped generously. The interesting thing was that about 1 in 10 cards had the doctor title on them. Story 55. My mom was a primary teacher in a European school that wealthy people around the world send their children to. She was trying to teach kids to be considerate of the cleaning staff and not throw trash on the ground. She said the kids would reply, "But my parents told me that making a mess is how we give these people jobs." The parents started to complain that the strict teacher would not let their children make a mess. Another time, she and the principal called the parents of a child with learning disabilities to discuss what kind of job the child would be capable of having in the future. My mom was very upset by the suggestion that any child of hers would have to work a day in their lives. Story 56. My grandfather worked for one of the 5 richest families in the state. He saved up for a long time to buy something for his baby daughter at a nice store, only to be turned away because of his race and the assumption that he could not afford anything. He was disappointed but continued with his day. His boss noticed he was not his usual self and asked what had happened. My grandfather did not want to say because it was not relevant to his job, but his boss was persistent. My grandfather finally admitted what happened and that he was a bit disappointed. Unknown to my grandfather, his boss went to the store and said he understood someone had tried to purchase something but was declined because of the assumption that their money was not good enough due to race. The boss said that since he was the one who paid that person, he understood his money was not good enough and would let all his wealthy friends know that their money was no good at that store. The store closed and held a private sale for my grandfather to buy the dress he wanted for his only baby girl. Story 57. Back in the day, I worked on an estate for a celebrity couple. Neurotic is an understatement. Phone calls at 4 a.m. saying I needed to go and buy organic lavender oil because she couldn't sleep. An 8-hour round trip to deliver a bacon sandwich cooked by his own chef, as he didn't like on-site catering. He was married to arguably one of the most beautiful women to have ever lived, had an awesome job, was a multimillionaire, and was miserable. The second estate had an old money husband. He had the title and land but was cash poor. The wife was new money or would be new money when she inherited from her father. The difference in the way they dealt with money was astonishing. She was spending too much, and the accountant told her to reel it in. Her response was to fire the accountant. She expected me to sail her yacht for her on the weekend with no overtime because it's fun. I could go on for days. Story 58. As you grasp the theme of most stories here, keep in mind that the executive branch of the United States government is run by billionaires and high net worth individuals, the cabinet and advisors, many lacking experience in the fields they govern. They have no emotional ownership of the millions of people negatively affected by their decisions. The Congress is pressured to conform or be removed. The judicial branch is stacked. Human greed and survival drive the system. When the White House states that Medicaid will be strengthened by the current bill, it is implied that the strength comes from changing qualifications, which reduces the number of people aided. The same applies to the federal premium tax credit for health insurance purchased through the marketplace. This administration, which is supposed to work for the people, cannot relate to 98% of Americans. Story 59. My boss got mad at people offering him free money. Galas, dinners, test drives in cars yet to be launched, concerts, free items such as expensive wines, delicacies, tickets to parks, and more are all handled by his secretary because it annoyed him. People used to call offering to be part of lucrative, already closed deals just to strengthen their relations with him. I saw it happen. It was during the real estate bubble, but still. He was a silent partner in some shady deals that concluded after proving to be lucrative. The use of his name made the deal happen, so he made a profit before even investing his money. He complained about those things a lot while getting richer just because he was already rich. His businesses were in beer, casinos, and telecommunications. I worked as a waiter for him and he liked me, which caused trouble with his son and made me quit. Story 60. Managed private golf, country, and social or city clubs for more than 2 decades. I have worked with, for, and befriended many of the top 1%. They are just like us. Imagine your favorite happy-go-lucky, helpful best friend. Now give that friend the means to help anyone in the world. There are many like that. Imagine that nasty, spiteful bully from your high school or neighborhood who took joy in making the lives of others miserable. Now give them all the resources in the world to continue to do that. Yes, I have met them too. What am I most shocked by? The hypocrisy. The most popular example is supporting fervent gun control and open borders, but often making use of armed guards and gated communities. I am also shocked by the anti-Semitic attitudes I saw between liberal Jewish people and more Orthodox or conservative Jewish people. At one club I worked at, a lonely wife of an extremely wealthy man would leave very expensive jewelry behind at the spa, gym, and card room, I think just because she wanted attention. Eventually, one of her high-end watches was never found. I suspect I know who took it. I just hope she found a way to pawn it for 10 times her annual average salary. I probably have as many positive, uplifting stories as I do examples of miserable human beings from my experience. I will say I have never come to trust even the nicest ones to pick one of us normal folks over one of their fellow extremely elite friends. Even if they know a friend or acquaintance is in the wrong, they will never side with the help over one of their own. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.